Hey there, Com 416 students. This is Renee Hobbs. I'm recording this video in Rome, Italy. And while I had thought, what a crazy idea, that I would be able to stay up for this, our synchronous class tonight, the reality of it is there's no way. This morning I had the opportunity to wake up at 7:30 in the morning and go on a great series of adventures giving talks about fake news to Italian journalists and journalism students and political science students. And I am just too tired to have a live class with you tonight. But I thought what I would do is talk a little bit about what I did talk about here in Italy, which is highly relevant to what you are learning about, and also talk a little bit about the work I'd like you to do for next week or for the week after you return from spring break, and the rest of the coursework. So I'm going to share my screen with you, like I always do, and talk through with you for about 15 minutes my my talk that I'm giving here in Italy, which is a fascinating opportunity as I am exploring fake news from the point of view of digital and media literacy. So I always begin by talking about where I come from here at the University of Rhode Island and my work at the Media Education Lab. This idea that viewers are socialized to become active or passive consumers of media, that the concept of literacy has been evolving for more than 2,000 years, from rhetoric, print literacy, visual literacy, information literacy, media literacy, critical literacy, computer literacy, news literacy, and digital literacy, that really all of these are expanding the concept of literacy, which can be defined as the sharing of meaning in symbolic form. And this idea that literacy is really a process, a cycle of accessing and analyzing and evaluating, creating, reflecting, and taking action. This idea that information analysis, information discovery and analysis leads to creative and reflective activities that inspire social action and lead to social transformation, a key idea of the process of digital and media literacy. I've been talking to Italians about their love-hate relationship with print media, visual media, sound media, and digital media, and I can't wait to tell you a little bit about what I've learned about people's love-hate relationship with media, technology, and popular culture. And most important and relevant for our class, I've been talking about the idea of choice overload, that although we like to think of information, entertainment, and persuasion as separate media forms, most of us experience those forms kind of as a blur altogether, where our information might come from watching an episode of CSI about the legal system, for example, and persuasion and entertainment kind of come together in different forms. So these forms of media are kind of a bit blurry. One thing I've been talking a lot about while I've been here in Italy is the new realities in the global networked ecosystem, as content costs very little to produce, as there's a gigantic amount of fragmentation going on in terms of what we produce and what we consume. And this concept that viral sharing means that popularity equals profit, right? The more viral your message is, the more money you can make. And of course, the unbundling of content. As content is consumed on Facebook, it gets decontextualized into little snippets and removed from its original source. So I've been comparing those four key ideas about the nature of global information with four ideas that represent essentials of human information processing. The idea of selective exposure, that we choose to be exposed to messages that fit our existing worldview. Confirmation bias, the idea that we choose to treat as more credible the sources that fit with our existing worldview. Reality maintenance, the idea that when we watch news and information, we're really not aiming to learn anything. We just want to make sure the world is still in place. And finally, the concept of performative sharing. That's the idea. When I choose to share content with my social network, I'm mostly choosing on the basis of what this content will say about me, that it's really an identity performance. My decision to share is speaking about how I wish to be portrayed to my peer group. And of course, that leads to really interesting biases, doesn't it? So we talked a lot about the idea that 60% of people share content without reading it. We owned up our own guilt in the process and considered the implications of this important reality. So in thinking about new forms of authority and expertise, I made the claim that attention economics is surpassing, upending traditional forms of authority and expertise, where we used to define authority and expertise by your title or your position or your expertise on the subject matter. Today, attention economics means you can achieve a kind of level of attention simply by being fast or immediate, by personalizing the message to individual users, by providing an interpretive framework, and by being findable, using keywords and tags and other ways to make your message easier to find. These four forms of attention economics are giving rise to a new class of experts who might not have any expertise in a subject or any particular position or knowledge, but they've got a handle on these other forms of value that matter to consumers today. So then we finally turned our attention to fake news, right? I asked the participants today in Italy if they could recognize whether they thought this particular example was fake news or not. And so I invite you to take a look at it. Breaking news: Trump's Android device believed to be the source of recent House leaks. Yeah, it makes perfect sense. Maybe these leaks are really happening from an unsecured phone that's in the White House. Maybe, maybe not. What we learned was that this news story appeared on everybody's Facebook. It took quite a few days for it to be identified as a fake news story. By the time it was finally flagged by Facebook, nearly a full week had gone by, with a lot of people thinking this might be real news. We also talked about the recent UK study, a sample of about 1,684 participants, people being shown 6 news stories. Some were true, some were false, but only 4% actually could detect the difference between the true and false stories, and more importantly, about half of the participants in this study misjudged one of the fake news stories, thinking it was true. And this effect was exacerbated if you were a Facebook user. If you were a Facebook user where you use Facebook as your primary source of news, 70% thought that at least one of the fake news stories was true. So this phenomenon that perhaps Facebook users are more susceptible to getting confused about fake news, definitely a fascinating phenomenon. Then I introduced this idea of 6 types of fake news. This is based on my own analysis of the fake news environment. We talked about disinformation. We've talked about that in this class. Willful use of inaccurate, false, or misleading information, usually for purposes of warfare. Disinformation used from against countries or competitors in a time of war. We talked about propaganda, of course, the strategic communication that's designed to influence attitudes, behaviors, or values. We talked about hoaxes, those tricks that are deceitful but hilarious. And we talked about parody and satire, where the form or content of a message is imitated in order to make a form of cultural criticism. And we talked about another kind of fake news only recently, as President Trump turned the definition of fake news to include errors in journalism, often due to deadline pressure or other circumstances, and partisanship, the idea that news has a bias or point of view. So in my talk, I consider how these genres of fake news are blurring and how important it is to consider the motives of those who create fake news. Because if you think about it, the folks who are creating disinformation and propaganda, well, their objective is to control knowledge, attitudes, and values. And if you think about it, the folks who are creating hoaxes and parodies or satires, their objective is to engage in cultural criticism or creative expression. And if you think about the folks who are making journalistic errors or engaged in partisanship, well, their interest is in informing and engaging the public. So today, for consumers to understand and critically analyze fake news, we need to have a crisper understanding of these different genres and a lot more thoughtfulness about the motives of the people behind the creation of these new forms. So we talked a little bit about how right before the election, the viral spread of fake news exceeded the sharing of mainstream news. And of course, this makes the mainstream media, both in the United States and in Italy, completely crazy. So then we talked a little bit about the question of whether labeling and algorithms can address the problem of fake news. When I was at the fake news conference, the news literacy conference at Facebook last weekend, this question was asked. Facebook is now labeling sources of news as disputed and indicating whether or not the sources are from a parody or a satire website, whether they represent a biased or politically partisan outlet. And the question is, can labeling help solve the problem of fake news? Similarly, the algorithms that allow each of you to receive different news in your Facebook feed, depending on the signals of quality that the shared information from your peers, your social network group represents. There is the possibility that maybe Facebook can restructure the algorithms to suppress the bad news, the fake news, the false and misleading news, and elevate the stuff that's quality. So can labeling and algorithms address the problem of fake news? Most of us, our experience with fake news was pretty meaningful this past election cycle, when nearly 1 million Facebook shares occurred on November 8th, when it was declared that Pope Francis shocks the world by endorsing Donald Trump. But this question only reminds us of the question of who decides what signals of quality should be used to label online news content. And this is an important consideration in thinking about the biases of labels and algorithms. So in this talk, I wanted to make sure to link theory to practice. And so I introduced the Italian journalists and media professionals and students to the key concepts of media literacy. The idea that messages are constructed representations. As you see in the photo, the paper drawing is a representation of the photograph of the guy. And the photograph of the guy is a representation of the real human being. So media messages are always constructed representations of a much more complicated reality. The second big idea that messages use different codes and conventions, this is an idea formulated by the Italian scholar Umberto Eco, and it's this idea that to read and write in particular media forms means to be aware of their characteristics of their genre, to know the conventions of a comedy, for example, or a drama, or a piece of poetry, or an op-ed, or a press release. As a reader, when you know what the conventions are, you become a smarter, better reader. And for writers, of course, knowing the conventions helps you be a more effective writer. But different forms of media use different codes and conventions. Third key concept really is that one we've been thinking about all semester, right? That people interpret messages differently, that we all may see the same piece of propaganda, but interpret it as beneficial or harmful, depending on our point of view. Fourth key idea, messages have economic and political power. This is absolutely huge. Understanding the way in which media economics shapes the way some messages come to us is important to understand, in part because of idea number 5, that messages have influence. They influence attitudes and behavior. That's why people are willing to pay so much to communicate to audiences, right? Because messages do shape the way we see the world, see each other, and even see ourselves, and how we make decisions about what to buy, who to vote for, and on and on and on. Okay, so what I do is I take those 5 ideas and I connect them back to the problem of fake news, labeling, and algorithms. And here's what I come up with. I'm claiming in this talk that algorithms are not neutral because they are created by people. They have an author, a purpose, and a point of view, and a bias. And we shouldn't think that Facebook is neutral because of the way it's delivering content to us. Algorithms are created by people, and people have a point of view and a purpose and a bias. I'm also a little nervous about labeling because we're right now in the middle of a reinvention of the field of journalism, where there's new forms of online news and information that are evolving with a range of different signals of quality. Like, for instance, an eyewitness video of police brutality shot at the scene by a witness, right? This is a unique form of journalism, the first-person witness. Right now, we don't have a good way to label such video, and yet, we know it is an important part of the journalistic landscape, right? It helps us understand the world around us. And I'm a little fearful of Facebook labeling stuff without fully appreciating the diversity of new forms that are evolving. Now, of course, because people create and interpret messages in light of their lived experience, respect for diverse perspectives is needed. Obviously, we've been talking about that all semester, and recognized how the Mind Over Media site is used to cultivate your respect for different interpretations. You might go to a piece of propaganda on the Mind Over Media website, vote whether you think it's beneficial or harmful, and then see how other people voted for it. And that may allow you to imagine other points of view. Now, we think it's important for everybody to understand the economics of the internet, especially pay-per-click, sponsored content, and native advertising. These are 3 forms of media economics that are becoming normative online and have a huge influence on the way in which propaganda gets presented. And finally, we think people need to take the time to reflect on how they are using media and how the media is using them. In my talk here in Italy, I talked a lot about my own desensitization to violence and how I have observed over the course of my lifetime that I used to feel more deeply when I got exposed to violent images of real life tragedy, and how now I don't feel so deeply, and I recognize the way in which I have become much more of a spectator, a disengaged spectator in the kinds of violence that formerly would move me to action. So reflecting on the way in which our own emotions are engaged or disengaged or hijacked in the process of being a media consumer, these are key ideas. So I argue in this talk that consumers and creators are both responsible for advancing digital and media literacy. And I think that's enough of a summary for the talk that I gave in Italy. All right, now what I'd like to do is show a little bit to you about what I'd like you to do for next week. You've gotten a little feel for the topic of fake news. I think you've got an appreciation of how the topic of fake news relates to propaganda. Now let's talk a little bit about what I'd like to do, what I'd like you to do between now and our next class. Of course, we're in spring break as of next week, so I hope you have a wonderful and terrific spring break. But here's what I'd like you to do for the following week, which is Thursday, March 23rd at 7 p.m. First, what I'd like to do with you is review and discuss your LEAP 3 project. LEAP 3 project is called Collaborate, Compare and Contrast Propaganda in the Past and Present. It's due the week after spring break, so just a short window there. Working with a partner, you compare and contrast two specific examples of propaganda from the present and the past, creating both an academic essay and an infographic, both of which are embedded in a blog post. The purpose of this project is to give you an opportunity to demonstrate the knowledge and critical thinking skills you're developing in this course. So there are, as far as I could see, there are 9 steps to do this working together. And the first step is finding a partner and developing a plan for collaboration. So there's a lot of creative people, as we've seen in this class, and I'm so pleased to see you tweeting and thinking actively about the ideas that you're learning. How fun it will be for you to collaborate, right? So what I'd like you to do is use this Google Doc to identify your partner. So basically what you can do is simply use this space below and say, I'm interested in X. That might be an example of contemporary media, and Y. That may be an example of historic media. Anyone want to partner? And this is Renee, and there's my phone number, right? So you guys will find a partner by using the Google Doc to identify your interests in LEAP 3, and your partner will naturally emerge. Since every creative team develops a way of working together that harnesses the unique talents of each individual, listen to this short radio segment on the power of 2. It suggests that creativity really comes from partnership. Then work out a plan with your partner. How will you two collaborate together on this LEAP 3 assignment? At the heart of your project is item 2, comparing and contrasting. You have to choose 2 artifacts, one contemporary artifact and one historic artifact. Comparing and contrasting is a powerful tool for learning. You can review the process of comparing and contrasting. There's a really great essay here from the Writing Center at the University of North Carolina about how to approach a comparison contrast project. That will give you a good understanding of the kind of academic essay and the structure of the academic essay that you're going to be writing collaboratively. Now you're going to have to choose 2 examples of propaganda. After brainstorming, you and your partner will figure it out. Which examples will help you engage in a comparison contrast. Then you're going to gather information and materials, and you might find a bunch of examples before you decide which 2 examples work best for your project, right? Obviously, you're going to gather information from a variety of sources to develop your academic essay and your infographic. Be sure to use a works cited list for all the sources you use, and use that APA format as suggested by the OWL Purdue Online Writing Lab. Stage 5, make connections to the course readings and videos. As you develop this academic essay, make sure you build upon and make active use of the knowledge you're gaining in this course as you develop and analyze those 2 examples. Now, you're going to organize and write this essay using Google Docs. So that's essentially going to help you to collaborate with your partner. You and your partner will co-construct that academic essay on Google Docs, and you'll submit your paper as a Google Doc. Now, once your paper is taking shape and you've figured out what artifacts you're going to use and you've figured out what your main ideas are going to be, it's time for you to explore PictoChart, because you and your partner are going to create an infographic. So how to do that? Explore PictoChart, watch the video overview. I'll be sending you in the next week or so, I'll be sending you an invitation for a pro PictoChart account, which will give you a lot of free tools to explore. And you'll experiment with this tool as you develop a way to express your ideas visually using an infographic. You might learn more about creating infographics by reading my latest chapter on creating infographics and data visualizations. That's from my new book coming out later this year called Create to Learn. Now, all of this, the academic essay, which is going to be about 8 to 12 pages, and the infographic, both of those are going to get placed on your blog page. And then each of you is going to tweet out a link using the hashtag COM416. Finally, after the project is all over, you'll be sending me, and I'll prompt you on this, I'll remind you to do this. I'll be sending you out a note saying, please send me a reflective email about your collaboration. What were the highlights of working with your partner? What were the lowlights of working with your partner? What was the creative collaboration look like? Because one thing we've learned for sure predicts people's career success. It's their ability to collaborate across time and space. And that's what you're getting to do with the Leap 3 project. You're getting to collaborate across time and space to create something awesome, right? All right. So I feel like with a careful reading of the Leap 3 assignment, you are well poised to complete that project by March 30th. But here's what I'd like you to do for the next class. It's a pretty modest set of activities given the kind of work that you're doing in this class. We do have a quiz that's open. The quiz is now open, and it'll be open from now, tonight, Thursday at 6 p.m. to Sunday at 6 p.m. Only 4 questions, open-ended. If you read the readings for this week, you should have no trouble at all. So take some time and complete those. Complete quiz 2, it's worth 50 points of the course. Then I'm going to ask you to read this really interesting essay by James Kimball called The Illustrated Four Freedoms, FDR, Rockwell, and the Margins of the Rhetorical Presidency. This is a really interesting essay about a famous set of paintings that became a powerful form of 20th century American propaganda. You'll read the essay, and then you'll respond to a question on the Flipgrid. Next, I'd like you to read a short article in the Atlantic magazine. It kind of complements the scholarly article. It's called The Meaning of Thanksgiving as Told Through Cold War Propaganda. We're thinking a little bit about how American identity and values are represented through 20th century propaganda. So here's an opportunity, again, for you to use that website annotation to read, critically read, highlight, and comment. Finally, we're going to watch the 9-minute excerpt from the film called The Wall. It's an American propaganda film about the German Berlin Wall. As you watch this short film, see if you can identify techniques which make the Cold War propaganda film effective. Choose one prompt that identifies specific communication strategy and use. So again, I'm taking you to the ant, and you remember how we watch a short piece of this propaganda film, then we highlight and make a comment. So I feel that though that set of activities is a relatively modest scope of activities, perfectly suitable for the scope of work that you're doing, given that you're hopefully taking a well-deserved break and coming back to see me on March 23rd at 7 p.m., knowing that your Leap 3 partnership project is due the 30th. If you guys have any questions, you know how to reach me, right? Yeah, you reach me on Twitter. In the meantime, ciao, bella. Mi chiamo Renee Hobbs. This is COM 16 at the Harrington School of Communication and Media. I think you guys are awesome, and I'll see you on Thursday, March 23rd. All right. Bye now, you guys. See you next week. See you the week after next. Bye now. Ciao. Ciao.